Is the world weary of Ukraine? And can we say that it transcends? This is the favorite topic of discussion both among American conservatives and Russian propagandists. But there are voices coming from the other side too. As several American and British outlets have reported, soon the EU countries will have trouble transferring weapons to Ukraine, for they have exhausted their own resources and now have to arm themselves first. President Zelensky, in his turn, frames this war as a war for European and global security, a life and death matter. Let's discuss this growing sense of skepticism with Edward Luttwak, a consultant to the U.S. State Department and Department of Defense, a senior associate of the Center for Strategic and International Studies. Welcome to TV Rain, Edward.
Yes. So I heard you say something.
It's good to see you.
About ammunition. So I want to show you nobody's running out of ammunition. What's happened is that both in Russia and in the United States and across Europe, the same wrong theory about war was accepted. During peacetime, all kinds of fantasies spread about war. War becomes, and one of these fantasies was the fantasy that was shared by General Gerasimov of the Russian army and American generals, European generals, that there is a new era of war, cyber war, political war, information war, iPhone war, etc., etc. So we don't need artillery, we don't need tanks, we don't need this and all this old-fashioned stuff, ridiculous things like rifles, machine guns, mines. No, it's going to be cyber and information war. This theory was accepted enough so that nobody, neither Russia nor the United States, maintained the capacity to simply produce normal weapons, normal ammunition, and so on. So what's happened is, of course, that the Russian Federation has been able to import ammunition and so on from places like North Korea, which in the past were happy to receive gifts of ammunition, and in the United States, the same thing. However, in the next 6 months, this problem will be history because there's nothing complicated about producing ordinary weapons and ordinary ammunition. So it's simply a matter of catching up. So it's not a crisis, it's not a problem, it's a very temporary thing. And in the meantime, the reserves are sufficient to continue this war at this low level. It's a very low-level war.
Mr. Luttwak, I'd like to shift this question a little more to politics rather than war talk. We are seeing a growing discontent among American politicians, many of whom can't help but argue against helping Ukraine. We don't have extra billions to spend, they say. In your opinion, where is this going? How serious is that resentment?
Well, yeah. Actually, when you look at the politics, is that a lot of people are tired about the war that continues and not a nice, quick war. On the other hand, the political situation across Europe is that like in the United States, a majority of the right and a majority of the left still agree to support Ukraine. The sacrifice is not large. It's a small sacrifice. No troops are sent to Ukraine. The money involved is not so much. So actually, Slovakia and Hungary and were from the beginning very hesitant about joining this war for different reasons, including cultural politics. Cultural politics in Budapest and in Slovakia is really with the same side as Vladimir Putin, the same cultural attitude about homosexuality and all this other stuff. So from the beginning, Slovakia and Hungary were not really important members of the alliance, but I believe that this alliance will maintain itself, even though it's a long war. It's a long war, and the long war requires a lot of patience. And patience is not usually what you see in politics.
Да, я прекрасно понимаю. В статье для
Yes, I get that. In a piece for Die Welt, you wrote that Ukraine has to mobilize 10% of the population if they want to win. So are you saying they are not sacrificing enough? Can you elaborate on this, please?
Как вы,
Absolutely.
да. Можете
In a
объяснить?
war for independence, in a war for independence, a mobilization rate of 10%, so with 10% of the people involved in defense. And so in the case of Ukraine, let's say it would be 3 million people in uniform, something like that. Of them, there would be approximately perhaps 1 million in combat, maybe 1.5 million in combat. These numbers have not been achieved because the level of mobilization remains low. For example, people with Ukrainian passports or military age around the world are not receiving a notice saying either you come back to Ukraine and fight or you cancel the passport. You don't want you have to you can't have a situation where the people in Ukraine are sacrificing. Ukrainian passport holders abroad are not sacrificing, but if there's a peace and reconstruction, they'll arrive back immediately and want to participate. This is not acceptable. So the level of mobilization is too low to fight this kind of very traditional war.
Скажите, пожалуйста, но когда вы
In another
говорите,
account
вы
of
пишете
yours,
в еще
you
одной вашей
argue that
статье,
it's
что
time to start the
необходимо,
peace
чтобы
talks
Байден
and
и
that Russia and
Путин
Ukraine
сели за
should
стол
strike a
переговоров,
deal.
заключили
What kind of a
сделку,
deal
то что
can
вы
that
имеете в
be?
виду? Какой может быть
Because we can see
сделка?
that Ukraine is ready
Потому
to
что,
keep
да,
on
мы видим,
fighting and
что
try to win back its
Украина готова
territories,
сражаться,
and
Украина
Russia
не
is not
готова
ready to
отдавать свои
back down.
территории, а Россия не готова, собственно, возвращать.
Right. So the question is that at the present moment, the Russian Federation is losing a lot from this war, and not on the front where the casualties are not huge, but nationally because of the problem of the emigration of Russians leaving Russia. They are not the worst people. Some of them are the best people, and they're leaving Russia, weakening the country. And this is the big loss, is the emigration of talented Russians. From the American point of view, on the other hand, the reason to end this war is not different. It's the same. Because from the American point of view, having a Russia that wins the war and starts invading France and England and so on would not be good. On the other hand, a Russia that is really weak, that has to ask for help from North Korea and help from China, this Russia is very bad for the United States because it means that all the countries between Russia and China, like Mongolia, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyz Republic, Tajikistan, but also Uzbekistan, all these countries would come under Chinese influence. Chinese influence is increasing today, even inside Russia, even in Siberia. It is increasing and this is not good from the US point of view because China is the big strategic opponent of the United States. The strategic enemy is China. And if Russia becomes very weak, China will have control. For example, Mongolian independence. Mongolia's existence as a state depends exclusively from Russian power. Without Russian power, Mongolia becomes a Chinese province in 2 days. And Mongolia is a huge country, full of resources. Kazakhstan is much stronger, of course, but Kyrgyz are very nervous, Tajiks are very weak, and if China becomes a much bigger country by controlling these spaces, I mean, Mongolia and Kazakhstan between them are gigantic countries. If the Chinese can have dominant influence in them, it will be a disaster for US policy. So the US policy does not want a defeated Russia, doesn't want a Russia with no power. And it's very worrying for Americans to see Russia importing weapons from North Korea, a miserable country that doesn't feed its own people. and has just a few old ammunition factories. We can't have this sort of thing. It's really not good.
Будут ли давать оружие, например, атакамсы?
So what do you think Washington's next moves are going to be? Will they send ATACMS, the much-awaited jet fighters and other weapons to Ukraine?
Которые сейчас обсуждаются.
Definitely, it's not possible for the United States to let go and abandon Ukraine. Abandoning the Ukraine would mean abandoning the entire role of the United States as a great power. So the option of cutting off Ukraine and saying, goodbye, Ukraine, you're on your own, etc., that option does not exist in American foreign policy.
And one last very short question. Do you think Ukraine can win in this war?
Well, Ukraine wins simply by not being defeated. I don't know how Russia can win this war, but all that Ukraine has to do is not to lose and to be able to maintain control of the core Ukraine, which is Kiev, Odessa, and so on, and the West, of course. And all they have to do is not to be defeated, and they win. In a war for independence, if you are able to come out of a war for independence as an independent state, you have won. You have won. And for Russia to win, you have to have Ukrainians accept the loss of territory. And that is a much more difficult thing to do.
I hope we'll have a chance to discuss further developments in this war. Thank you very much. That was Edward Luttwak, a consultant to the U.S. State Department and Department of Defense, a senior associate at the Center for Strategic and International Studies, joining us from Washington.
We operated in Russia for 12 years, and the government tried to get rid of us 3 times.
We had to leave, forced out of the country by new repressive laws after the first week of the war. Our freedom crushed by the authorities.
Мы временно приостанавливаем работу телеканала.
We survived, started working from Europe, and now we are watched by millions of people every day.
There's no other independent news channel in Russian. We have now decided to tell the truth about Russia in English as well.
So that you could get news about Russia, the war in Ukraine, and Russian society directly from the source.
We want to tell you firsthand what is really happening in Russia. Subscribe to TV Rain Newsroom on YouTube, and let's take a look at our future together.